Live from Michigan City, Indiana, it's Long Arm TV Live with Jamie Wallen.
Boy, he's getting pretty much a big kick out of that one, isn't he? So my own Ed McMahon, that's pretty awesome. So welcome everybody. I hope you're having an amazing day, and I hope everything is going as good as it can be out there for everybody. Today we're going to be actually doing a specific design, and it's going to focus on our new dimensional type tools. So hopefully you will enjoy watching it and seeing some of the amazing 3D dimension effects that you can get when you're doing your surface quilting. One of the things I want to show you real quick is in a few days we're going to be doing this particular one, and let me grab the stack. We just put these up. They have just come in and they are up on the website now. And this is our Magical Weave Triplet tool, and it does this amazing design as well as some other really cool things. I use it for filler, like I said, if I'm doing modern quilt designs, or if I'm in big open spaces, or in specific borders. I like to use this a lot. So there was one of those, and there will be another one that we'll be doing in a while. We'll be playing with that shape. And then today we will actually be doing this particular basket weave right here. So which is based on the bow tie shape, which is pretty awesome. And it comes in a large, and it also comes in a mini for a small background space. Now with this ruler, if you utilize this ruler, what we do is, this is the drawing portion that you would mark your section, whether it be your paper or your actual quilt. And then what you would do is use our mini curve, and I prefer the double curve as opposed to the mini curve 1. So this would be the mini curve 2, Mr. Curve 2 mini. And so this curve is going to match exactly the marking of this particular tool. So now let me put this stuff aside and let's get started on how we would work this. Also, we'll have in a future episode something that's going to explain how you can actually go inside the weave and create some really cool designs on the inside of the weave. Okay, put that aside, and let me organize myself here. You know, the last few days doing this whole live thing, I have a whole lot more respect for Lawrence Welk. I can't imagine how they would do it live. All right, so now we are in the space of our quilt, and we're going to be using paper to do the drawing, just to kind of get you familiar with how this works. And what we're going to do is, if this were a quilt, I would locate the center vertical line, and that's going to be my home line that I'm going to work from to draw this out. And now we're going to organize our camera a little bit here, Mr. Ritchie. I'm going to take us in a little bit closer, a little bit closer. That looks good. Okay, so now you can see that I've already marked. I've used a straight ruler and I've marked with what would be your chalk on your quilt. I used a pencil on the paper, the center line, so that I can keep everything lined up. So now what I would do is this. If this were the bottom of my throat space, right near my belly bar down here, then what I would do is I would start marking at the top of my quilt. So I would bring my ruler, I would line it up, and you'll notice with this particular ruler, what we have, if you can see, is it's got crosshairs in here. And so that is going to line up, and I'm going to keep that right on the line. Now, the one thing to remember is I see a double line as I'm looking at this. That means this ruler is upside down. So I need to turn it the other way so that way I know that the etching is against the fabric, or in this case, the paper. So I'm going to keep that line right there. I'm going to line this up. And if I were marking on a quilt, if it were on color fabric, I would be using my Bobbin, and I would actually be using the thin tip pencil with the Bobbin in white. And then if I were actually marking on white fabric, I would be using my blue water-soluble Mark Speak On. And those are the products that I prefer. And then if I were going to be removing this on the fabric, I would be using my Blue Line Erase. Okay, so now I'm going to line that up. And because we're on paper, I'm actually going to be using a marker. I'm going to line that up straight as I can. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to do my outline. And my angle for the filming is a little odd, so you'll get the point as we go. I would do that with my chalk, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab my pencil, which would be my chalk as well. And I would go ahead and I would put registration marks right on the crosshairs, and you'll see why we're going to add those in just a second. And now I'm going to turn this the opposite way. So now I'm going to take this vertical where it was horizontal. And I'm going to line that up perfectly even right on this line, and I would repeat the same process. I butt right up against there, keep my line straight. And by the way, make sure, and I've done this a few times on quilts using this tool, make sure that you're not just looking here with that straight line. You want to make sure back here that that's lined up, because if I do this, it looks lined up here, but back here it's a little bit off. So we want to make sure that it's lined up perfect from front to back. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this shape right there. Come down, and again, I am pre-marking everything as I go. And if I'm on my machine, I would be pre-marking right on the frame. Turn that the opposite way, and I would continue alternating this all the way down to the bottom of my throat space. And that's the wonderful part about these particular tools. And I'm just going to go ahead and use this rather than grabbing my pencil. Because this sample, I will probably just go ahead and toss at the end, come down. Now when we finish this, we're actually going to go over to the machine and we're going to quilt this out. I'm going to show you how this quilts out. And I'm going to come down and do this. I know we jumped right into the designs. We're going to save our questions for afterwards. So if you do have any questions, you can just give me a holler after we finish, and we'll leave a little bit of a section for question and answers. Okay, now I'm going to continue all the way down. Boom, slide. And I want to make sure to keep your marking tool up against the actual template or the ruler. That way you're not going to be getting any distortion. Okay, and again, out here, especially on these sides, I'm going to go ahead and give myself those little ticks, because once we finish this row, as we work our way down, then we're going to head up this way. So now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to, and that's why I have these lines here, I'm going to line that up there, make sure that that's lined up. And now I'm going to go ahead and head my way up and do my next row. And it doesn't matter, you could go to the right or you could go to the left, whichever is the most comfortable for you. And I want to make sure to put my little tick here, little tick here, little tick there. Slide this up, line that up. Everything fits perfectly. So I'm going to line this up. And what you're creating is this wonderful three-dimensional weave. Now I love using this, like I said, in open spaces, but it gives me a lot of opportunity to go into these spaces and actually put secondary designs, which of course most of you know, if I see fabric, it's not quilted enough. So I'm going to line that up, go back, and I forgot my tick mark. But again, remember, quilting is not about perfection. Line that. Again, I'm going to go ahead, and don't forget my little tips over here. Now, even if I did forget to put this little guy in, when I actually go to quilt it with my ruler, it's still going to go and it's going to be fine. So you don't, if you miss these little spots, you don't have to stop and go back. You'll get used to how you use these. And I find that I'm using these more and more on quilts. It just gives a really nice feel. I think we're going through a phase, as much as I love my feathers and feathers in general and leaves and that sort of stuff, we're going through a time when we're doing different things design-wise. Our eye is being attracted to different shapes, more 3D type effects, more straight lines. I think we're taking a little break from feathers. Kind of like when you read, and if you read a lot of specific genre, sometimes you have to take a break to fall back in love with it when you come back. So I'm going to turn that again, and I'm going to come straight up, line that up. Now as you're marking this, it goes pretty fast, as you're going to see here. If I wasn't explaining it, it would be going much quicker. Okay, so now I'm going to pop over to this side. Okay, and the same thing, I'm going to start low and I'm going to come high. I can just keep in a little bit more control if I work from low to high. But my first row should always start at the top of my throat space and come down in the center so that everything is balanced right to left, and also the edge of the quilt will look a lot better. Come down, again, put my little registration marks there, put one out here, one down here, and again, I have a little partial here, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flip that little guy and make sure I'm in screen so that you can see. If I go out of screen, sorry about that. There we go, and now I'm going to slide up, place those, and again, this tick goes here, this tick goes here, and I'm just alternating all the way up until we finish. And I would be completely drawing this whole space. Now, let me do just a few more here. Up, around. Again, keep your marking tool against the edge of that ruler. You don't want to go like this and start twisting. Let me go here. I don't want to go up and go this way so that way I'm going to be even just 1/8 of an inch away from the ruler. I want to keep it as close to that ruler as I can, because remember, these match to this ruler when it's quilted. And if you accidentally put an extra 1/8 of an inch on the outside, then this won't line up the way that it needs to line up. So those are just a few tips that I found when I was exploring with this particular ruler, and we were trying to formulate how it would work the best. Okay, I'm going to come up. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second. Let's finish that. And so I would work my way from the center out, however big that design would be, whether I was using the big guy or the little guy. Now with this little guy, that's going to be using the same curve. So these both are married to the Mr. Curve 2 Mini. And the reason that I suggest utilizing this with the Mr. Curve 2 rather than the Mr. Curve 1 is the Mr. Curve 1 actually has a flat bottom. And so if I were working with that, then it's going to be hard to have to turn the ruler and put it behind the foot. Whereas with my Mr. Curve 2, you can actually go ahead and quilt this curve, and then when I come over here, I could come sideways, and then when I come here, so the ruler will always remain in the front of your hopping foot. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody, and it will when we get over to the machine. So let's look at this space here. Again, there's a lot of different things that we can actually do to fill up this space, because once we quilt it, and I do like to go in and fill these little squares just to give it a little bit more of a 3D effect. You don't have to. You know, I know everybody has a different level of density in their quilting, but one of the things that I like to do is to use like a small curve. And what I'll tend to do is, once I get everything, my base quilted, And by the way, when I'm quilting this, what I'm actually going to be doing as I'm quilting, let's pretend this is my quilting ruler, is I'm not just going one line over and over, because there are a few lines you're going to have to retravel. I like doing my 1, 2, 3. If you've been following any of my work for a while, you know that there are some times in some of my designs that I retravel a line, especially if I'm doing ditch work. And for me, this is going to be exactly the same as curved ditch work. So when I would be quilting this, I would be going 1, 2, 3, stop, and then 1, 2, 3, stop, 1, 2, 3, stop, 1, 2, 3. So that's how I would be quilting this as I go, and then following it back up. So now if I wanted to add to this, I would have my ruler, and I would be re-following, once this is all done, those lines. And I want to share a little secret with you. When you get seasoned as a quilter, you actually, once you finish quilting the base of this, when you want to go in and add your other stuff, you're going to find that you can stay pretty close to almost exactly on that line without even using a ruler to go back in to do different areas. But that's something that comes with time. So sometimes what I like to do with this, once it's all quilted, is I will take my small curve, and the first few times you do it, like I can look across and see my ticks here, and I know right where they're at. But when you're new, you may choose to use some chalk, make a line across on all of those, make a line across on all of those, right where the ticks are. And then I'm going to go in a 1/4 inch. You could go in a 1/2 inch, you could go in a 1/4 inch, you can do however much you want, and I would be using my small Mista curve or small curve of whosever brand you have of curves for this part. And of course I would be traveling 1, 2, 3, travel the ditch, flip the ruler. I would use the Mista Curve 2 rather than the Mista Curve 1, and repeat that same process, so that now what you're doing is you're taking that basket weave and you're actually adding a whole new element to it. Now that's just one of, I have about 40 or 50 different elements now that I'm doing in here. And because we have that center line, this part's quilted. I don't pre-mark that. I just go ahead and quilt that as I go. But once I have this and I pull off to the next side, then my next part would be, maybe I would go up here and I would chalk from the center out. I always want to work from the center line out and create 1/4 inch. And I'll just put a little chalk line there, and then I'll go to 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch. And then same thing, from the middle out and down, same thing. I would go 1/4 inch, because that's going to give me a 1/2 inch in the dead center. And then I would go to another 1/2 inch, slide another 1/2 inch, slide another 1/2 inch. And so now I have this wonderful effect of the basket weave actually weaving in and out. So what we would actually have is something such as here, if you can see that. And again, there are a ton of different things that we can do to play with this. I can actually go in and put an X. And those of you, again, that have taken my feather classes, I might put 2 lotus feathers in here. I could use my small arc or the narrow arc and do some arc designs in here. There's just, again, the sky's the limit on this stuff. These are just bases that you may choose to just use in a basic way, like you see here, to get this beautiful weave. Or you can actually take it and you can actually add some more elements to jack up the level to make it a little more high-end custom. And again, I do like to go into these little square sections, and I like to do some microfill in there. It doesn't take that long. And that's just some of the stuff that we can do. So now, let me see. How are we going to do this? Let's, do we want to ask some questions, Rich, before we go to the machine? Do we have any questions? No questions? Okay. So what we'll do now is we are going to take about a 3 to 5 minute break. Rich is just going to put the pause screen on, so if you just stay there, give us 3 to 5 minutes and we will switch over, and then we will move the camera and we will be at the machine so that I can show you how to quilt this out. All right, wonderful. Welcome back, everybody. And the mic is hot, Mr. Ritchie. Am I good to go? All right. So now what I've done actually is I have marked out from here over. And Rich, can you zoom in there so that they can kind of see those marks okay? And it looks like you can see them pretty well. You can see that it's a little bit lighter because I'm using this really thin tip right here. But you can see that I've pre-marked everything out, and doing this whole side. On a queen size quilt, I would say doing the throat space would probably take me about 5 to 10 minutes to get it marked, so it doesn't take that long. Now we're going to go back to right here, and I'm going to head up. I've got my little halfways marked, and so I'm going to come right here, and I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to repeat just like we did on the paper. And I'm going up against the ruler to mark that out, down, under. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it sideways. Whoops, I forgot. Make sure to get my little ticks so that way I have a little bit of a guideline so I can place it, get it lined up, and move fairly quickly. You'll start to build a muscle memory on that. It took me about half of a row the first time I did the quilt to build that muscle memory of make sure to put the little tick lines in so that way when you turn it, you can get it lined up exactly, just like anything else. Okay, up. And remember, I don't want to push too hard with my ruler down. I don't want to stretch things out so that the ruler is off. I'll line that up, and then, whoops, again, tick mark, tick, tick, turn, slide, and then I'm going to line that up and come right up here. And again, what you're going to get, and I'm using the big one right now just so we can see better, especially I would use this in nice big spaces, but we do have the little mini, which looks awesome in the background of blocks. Okay, so now I'm going to turn that again, line it up, and those both use the same mini curve, so we don't have to buy a ton of tools. And these tools we have got down really low, so they are very inexpensive, which is wonderful as far as I'm concerned. And they are called Mystical Dimensions. This is the number 1, Mystical Dimensional, number 1, and it is on the website. Okay, so now I'm going to come over here, and let's just say that I have marked the whole thing. I would come up to my top left of my quilt here, and I would actually go ahead and start quilting. I'm sorry, Mr. Ritchie, could you grab me my snips? I left my snips over on the table. It's different than filming the other tutorials. We don't get to edit all my goofs out. I know it. I can't be mean to you now. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to lower my needle. Lock my stitches. And I'm going to double check. I am at 12 stitches per inch. That's what I like to work at when I'm doing this type of work. I'm going to line that ruler up right there. And again, I have a little bit of the handy grip on the back, so it's not going to slide. 1, 2, 3, come down. Now I'm going to turn the ruler, line it up. And again, perfection is overrated. I'm going to go 1, 2, and I'm going to take my time as I'm quilting. 3, come up, stop, turn my ruler. Now I could do one of two things. I can go on this side or I can go on this side, whichever is more comfortable for you, whether you're right or left-handed. Now I am right-handed, which means my ruler will always be held in my left hand. I shouldn't say always, but a lot of the time it's going to be held right in my left hand, and that little handle there is going to keep me out of harm's way. I'm going to come down, I'm going to thicken that line just a little bit with my 1, 2, 3, I'm going to take it, I'm going to turn, and again, if I'm a little off, I'm not going to like go crazy. You know, I'm not a computer. And I will say we do actually have these computerized on the, which site, Rich? Urban Elements is starting to get some of these computerized for us. Now I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to turn that. Yeah, they are pretty amazing. Patricia Ritter is the tops in my opinion. I just love her. The way that she takes designs and adds her own flair and makes them even a little bit better than what I show her. Come down and then again. So now I'm going to continue down. So I'm going to go in just a little bit. I'm going to follow this just like you would any ditch work. And now I'm going to come in and flip it this way. Or remember, I can either turn my ruler here or so that you can see, I can turn it this way. Now the thing is I'm going to keep my pinky for the camera out of the way. Normally, if you weren't here and we weren't filming, I would be doing this. This would be the more comfortable way for me to quilt this out. Okay, so now I would go ahead and I would turn it this way, and then we would just continue, and I would go row by row to completely quilt out this whole guy all the way over from left to right. Okay, so that's how we use that, and those are an introduction to the new tools. So now if you have any questions, and by the way, not just on stuff like this, we are here spending time with you as we are quarantined in our homes, supposedly, and we've been bouncing back between the studio and the home. So if you have any questions at all covering anything, please don't hesitate to ask. What I'd like to do now is I would actually like to go ahead, now that we've seen a little bit of a design tutorial, give us like 1 or 2 more minutes. We're going to switch, we're going to go over to the table, and we're going to have our tension talk, because I've had a lot of you say, will you please give us the tension talk and tell us the new stuff that you were going to add to that tension discussion. So let's head over. He's going to put it on pause, and we'll be right back. Welcome back again. Okay, so let's have the talk about tension. You know, again, tension is one of those issues with surface quilters, whether you're a sit-down quilter or a stand-up quilter, that we tend to struggle with. It's just, it's scary. And I think that most of the fear comes from the 90% problem with doing the surface quilting, and that is we're not mind readers and we're not magicians. And the whole issue with tension is quilt top, quilt back, where is my stitch in here? It's like I'm not a magician. How do I figure all of that out? So number one, let me start this whole redo on the whole tension discussion with starting with what I think is the first issue. I am a wind your own bobbins kind of guy. I constantly wind my own bobbins. I'm not a pre-wound guy. I prefer to wind my own bobbins. And so therefore, number one, if you do wind your own bobbins, which most quilters tend to do, that's where the trouble can start. So let me grab my bobbin winder and bring that over. Actually, let me unplug that. I don't need the cord. Grab this, bring it there. There we go. I'm going to bring it here. So let's have a little talk about our bobbin winders, because that's where we can tend to run into some issues. And Mr. Ritchie, if you could do some camera work here for me for a second. Now, bobbin winders are pretty typical as far as no matter what brand you have, there are some basic parts that are the same. It's always the same theory. The spool comes up, the thread goes down, it goes through your thread guides. This happens to be the Handy Quilter one. My APQS one was similar. My ANOVA one was similar. My A1s were similar. My old Gamel was similar, same, they're very similar. So let me say this. Number one, where people can blow it sometimes are, here is the tensioner, my disc tensioner. And usually they're always a disc tensioner rather than a rotary tensioner. And where a lot of people will run into trouble is they'll have this disc tensioner set way too tight. And so what I say is the test you always want to do is this. But let me add a little caveat to this. On this particular bobbin winder, I have found that I like to do something a little bit different than how it's supposed to be. And that is, it's supposed to be the thread comes around the back, around the disc tensioner, and comes down and feeds out. Okay? Now, what I find is I get better bobbins if I actually go under with my thread, the disc, and then come over to my bobbin and then wind my bobbin, so that way it never pops out from the disc. Now with my tensioner, notice here when I pull this, this is my test. I grab a hold of the thread right here. Can you go in on that a little bit? Here is my disc tensioner. Here are my discs. And so what I'm going to do is grab my thread and I'm slowly going to go ahead and give a tug. And look what's happening right now. Before the thread starts to pull through, my thread is stretching out a little bit. So what's happening is my tension on my disc, on my bobbin winder, is too tight. So now when I'm winding my bobbins, as it's stretching and coming through and the bobbin is winding, I'm actually winding stretched thread throughout the bobbin. And so what I want to do is I want to loosen this. Am I going the right direction? I'm backwards. I'm backwards on this. So now lefty loosey, lefty loosey, lefty loosey.
Well, it's backwards for you.
It is backwards. You're right. So now I'm going to pull, and that's a little bit better, but I still have a little bit of resistance. So I'm going to go a little bit further. Now I have no resistance. So now I know that it's actually too loose. So now I'm going to find that happy medium where when I grab it, it feeds nice and smooth, and the thread just pulls right through without any issue. Now I know that my bobbin winder tensioner is set properly. So at that point now, with some of the bobbin winders, instead of having a knob here, you're going to have a little screw. Then that's going to be your adjuster. You would get a screwdriver, whether it's Phillips or flat, and you would go ahead and you would use that screw to do that. So now when you wind your bobbin, you're going to end up with a evenly wound bobbin and that's not stretched. Now, why is that an issue? Well, it's stretched. So that means if you're winding thread that's stretched onto your bobbin and then you go to quilt, every time you come to a stop, I'm back up. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Technical difficulties, and that wasn't on our end. I think it's something that's going on with YouTube. Okay, so anyways, let me real quick kind of recap again. Remember, we grab this thread, we give it a very slow pull, and we want to make sure that the thread is not taut too much or stretching before it actually feeds through the disc tensioner. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, we take it, we put it in our bobbin case, and this is for every brand, and like I was saying, if I repeat myself, it's because I don't know where we dropped. Whether you're a sit-down quilter on a home machine, typically I say if you're going to do sit-down quilting on a home machine, I like to do it with a machine that has a bobbin case so that I can adjust that tension, but it's going to apply the same. So now I'm going to take my bobbin case, and everybody has seen me do this test where other people do that. I'm going to lay it flat in my hand, I'm going to give it a gentle pull, and I'm going to go up like this. Now notice, my bobbin case is coming up off my hand when I do that, just a little bit. So I know that it is on the tight end of good. Now it would be too tight if I pulled this and the bobbin case came all the way up with my hand and I had to jiggle like this to have it come down a few inches and then keep doing that to get it to go down. So the bottom line for me is this isn't bad, and there are some machines that like it just a little more tight, like this one. Okay. Now, what if I do this test and it didn't, this bobbin case right here, if you want to go in a little tighter on that, Mr. Ritchie. What if I do the test and the bobbin case didn't come up on its side like that? It would just stay laying down, but the thread would feed through. Well, obviously then what that means is the bobbin tension on your bobbin case is too loose. So now again, this is kind of exactly what I want, but it is coming off my hand a little bit. But for some machines, they prefer that. Now, when would that be a problem? Well, I'll tell you what, I would want to loosen that bobbin tension just a little bit more if I were going to be quilting with the invisible thread or the metallic thread or any of the high decorative weak threads like the, let me see, glitter, shimmer, any of those fragile type threads. I would want to loosen my bobbin tension a little bit more so that that way when I do this, it would be more like, okay, let me put my eyes on. You can go in tight, you can go out a little bit if you want to, it's up to you, as long as they can see what I'm doing. So lefty loosey, I'm going to loosen, and it's for our machines, it's and any of the quilting machines out there, it's always the big screw, and it's a small adjustment. Got to remember that. You don't like crank it. We're talking like if it were a face of a clock, we're talking like you would take it from, if you're loosening from 1 o'clock to noon. That's as far as you would turn it, because these little screws, they don't have a lot of depth, and so you don't want that baby to fall out. Otherwise, you will never find it. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to come up. That loosened it a little bit, but I know that if I were using metallic or an invisible thread on a few of my machines, that wouldn't be enough. Now, most of our machines, it doesn't matter. It'll run that way. Now, see, that's a little bit better. That's a little more loose, and I know now that when I pull that up, it's only flipping up part way, but it's feeding out a lot less tight. Okay, if you want to go wide. So now, that is our adjustment. Now, here's the thing to remember. If you remember from yesterday's discussion, I only use one type of bobbin thread in my bobbin, no matter what I'm using on top. So because of that, I really only have to adjust my bobbin case once. If I were constantly switching threads, I would constantly have to be readjusting my bobbin case, which is, again, that's going to wear out that screw, it's going to wear out your bobbin case, and the bobbin cases tend to be a little bit expensive. The other thing that I would add is this. Once a week I take this, and you've seen my thing. If you haven't, we have bobbin case dewarpers for size L and M size bobbin. It's a reamer. It just goes in, and it's machined perfectly to an M size as well as an L size bobbin. It's not for the home machines. That's a whole different beast. And you would go in, and that's going to ream it. Because the one thing to remember with our bobbin cases, which is where we can run into trouble with tension, is we all do the thing. We're fumbling under there, we pull out the bobbin or the bobbin case, and you know, I'm not going to catch that one of these times. So again, I'm going to take this. Aha! This is a warped bobbin, and this is the one that I was just running, a warped bobbin case. And so it's a little hard to get on there. You want to squeeze in there a little tight, Mr. Ritchie? Okay, I'm right here, and it's hard to get on there. So this bobbin case has hit our light carpet floor a few times, and it's been warped. And it only takes once or twice to have a warped bobbin, and these babies are expensive. So get yourself a bobbin case dewarper, and what it'll do is, again, you see that? It's hard, and now I'm going to just turn this, and that's re-reaming that into perfect round. And so just this little bit, let me give it just a few seconds, and this is exactly how I would be doing this at my machine. Now, easy on, easy off. See? It has re-reamed it. And now it's perfectly rounded. Because what will happen is if this is warped a little bit, when you have your bobbin case and you put your bobbin case in there, it's like a wobbly wheel. Bobbin in there. When you put your bobbin in the bobbin case, what will happen is it's like a wobbly wheel. It's going to rub, not rub, rub, not rub. And that's why sometimes you can also get intermittent tension. Okay, so let's keep going. So now, ooh, perfect. Bobbin case flips up on its side, but does not leave my hand. Now, for some machines, it likes to leave your hand a little, but it should stay within 3 or 4 inches from your hand as you are pulling that thread up. Now, the next test then is this. I go over to the machine. I'm going to pop my bobbin right into my bobbin case. Snap it in. I'm going to grab a hold of the tail of thread and I'm going to pull out about 8 inches. What I'm feeling for when I grab a hold of that tail of thread and I give it a pull is a smooth pull. It should be smooth. There should be no pull tug, pull tug, pull tug. Not even a little, not even that wobbly wheel feel. It should just go nice and smooth. It should feel as smooth as this feels. This is nice and smooth, and that's how it should feel when you do that. So then the next step is you go over to your machine, sit down, stand up, whatever. Hit your needle down up. It's going to pull up your bobbin thread. Grab a hold of the bottom. If you're on a stand-up machine, bring the hopping foot right over to where that bobbin thread is coming out. And you're going to give another 8 inches. Pull, and it needs to be smooth. That will always tell you if you have an issue with a warped bobbin case or you have a bad bobbin, especially if it's a pre-wound bobbin. Then it's going to feel pull, tug, pull, tug, pull, tug. And I've gotten a few pre-wounds that it shows, because sometimes it shows we use pre-wounds that are not that great, and you'll feel that weird pull, and it's not going to keep a consistent tension. So again, let's start again. Test 1, smooth. Test 2, snap it in. Pull, smooth. Test 3, needle down up. Pull the thread up through before you start stitching. Smooth. Now, that is 90% of good and bad tension. Here is the other 10%. Your top tensioner is simply there to pull the thread up where it needs to be in the quilt sandwich so that you have good tension. 90% of good tension is all in your bobbin case. So as long as you follow the parameters that I just gave you, you should never struggle with any type of thread, whether it be the little invisible thin threads, whether it be metallics, whether it be whatever. Just remember though, if you're using the metallics and the fragiles, you always want to stick with a nice smooth 40 poly. So now, how do you get perfect tension? How you get perfect tension is you need to figure out where is the stitch in your sandwich, because 100% of the times when you stitch a quilt out, whether you're on a sit down or whether you're on a stand up, what will happen is once that quilt is removed from the frame or on the sit down laid out flat, the threads will sink about 1/3 to 1/2 away into the sandwich. And so what that means is if you're playing this game, you're looking at the tension on top, that looks good, then you flip up the batting, that looks good. How do you know? Because in that sandwich, let's say this is the quilt top, let's say this is the quilt back, and this is the batting in here. If your stitch is down towards the backing, just above the backing, it looks good when you do the looky-see test, but when you remove that from the frame or lay it out flat and those threads do the sink 1/3 to 1/2 of the way down, it'll come out the back of your quilt, and then you're going to have bad tension. We've all done it. It's like, wow, it looked great on the frame. How come I have the pokies? It's because you didn't pull it up. So here is how you do the next test. So now you did your test, 3 tests, everything's good. And you can go off to the side of your quilt if you're beginning a new quilt, and you have that little strip of backing with 4 inches of batting, and I just pin a little piece of muslin or fabric on there, and what I do is curved zigzags. So I'll just quilt, curved zigzags, and I keep tightening my top tensioner 1 full turn at a time, not click, 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 that does nothing. 1 full turn until I see pokies in the points of those little curved zigzags coming down that little strip of muslin. So when I see pokies of bobbin thread coming up in those points, what that's just told me is I've used my top tension properly to pull the stitch up to the top, and then now I can see little pokies. I didn't say loops, I said pokies. So once you see those pokies, now you know that in that quilt sandwich, your stitch is right here at the top. Now I back off my top tension about 1/4 to 1/2 of a turn, and that will just take that stitch to just below the quilt top. So now I know it's just below the quilt top, and when I remove it from the frame or lay it out flat the first time, what's going to happen? It's going to sink down into the center of the quilt sandwich, which is exactly where you want it. So that little bit takes about 30 seconds when you're starting a new quilt, and you don't depend on whether or not you the last quilt was perfect. Yeah, but on the last quilt, maybe you used 80-20, whereas on this quilt, you might be using polyester or a wool. You have to do that little test at the beginning of the quilt every single time to make sure if you have different thicknesses of batting. Plus, what if it's fabric that has more sizing in it? That's going to make a difference as well. So always test per quilt. So that's my tension talk redone. And Mr. Ritchie, do we have any questions?
Yes. First question. I'm sorry. This is from Kathy A. Is your preference for winding your own bobbins based on your experience? I just switched over to pre-wound and I'm really not noticing a difference.
So I just like the control. I'm OCD. I like the control of winding my own bobbins. I like being able to pick my own colors because a lot of the pre-wound bobbins don't come in the color that I want to have, and I want to have the exact color that I want to have. And I will say this, years and years ago when pre-wounds just kind of started, I found that there was inconsistency. So I got burned a few times. I think the pre-wounds now are totally a different quality. You know, for example, Superior Super Bobs, fabulous. You rarely find inconsistency from what I hear from people that use the Super Bobs, as well as we have the Magna Glide bobbins, and those we have found they're pretty consistent, but I'm spoiled. And also, Isocord does not come in pre-wounds, and I love my Isocord in my bobbin, so I like to wind my own bobbin. Plus, it's my thing in the morning. You know, I've got the dogs, and I'm winding bobbins. It's kind of my wake up and get going kind of gig. So that's my preference. It's just personal preference and OCD control. So one place I get to be OCD.
Next question is from Ruth K. Do you need to take out the spring in the bobbin case to use the item to fix your bobbin case? I think she's referring to the dewarper.
I did that. I'm getting used to the audio. We have to turn off his mic, otherwise we get echo. We're learning this stuff as we go, and I tend to rush in. And he's over there. Stop it. Okay, so now when I do this, I do not take out this check spring when I dewarp my bobbin because it doesn't make a difference. Okay, so that check spring does not come out. And I will say this, let me throw this little thing in there with this. When I do this with my check spring in that bobbin, and I do that, the one thing I notice is people have adjusted their check spring so that when they put a bobbin in, that bobbin is coming up above the lip of the bobbin case. That's too much. That is too much spring in your bobbin. That's adding a whole lot of tension. I like to have it so that it's just when there's just a little bit of cush in there, but it doesn't go up above the lip of my bobbin case. But no, when I do my bobbin case dewarper, I don't take that thing out. I do take my bobbin case check spring out if I am going to use pre-wound bobbins. Now, Hindi Quilter says that you don't have to. I do. And I find that I have much better luck. So there we go. And I'm talking about the Magna Glides. I don't think you have to do that with the Super Bobs because they have a flat plastic side. That's it. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed having you in our studio. Um, and again, I want to say to everybody, I hope everybody's holding up good. I hope you're kind of getting a lot of extra tidying and house cleaning done, and you're actually working on some projects that you don't typically have time to do. If right now you're out of work or you're working from home, and you're taking care of yourself and you're nurturing yourself and you're taking the proper space away from family members in your house that you need to take, because again, when we're all trapped into the house together, you know, it can tend to go a little bit like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. So again, I hope everybody's doing okay. Tomorrow we're going to be back again, and what we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to do one and I believe two of them. What I'm going to do tomorrow is I actually have a custom quilt that I'm working on. I want to show you a wonderful cornerstone tomorrow morning on a quilt that I'm working on. And then the second one tomorrow, I thought we would do a drawing session. And I thought what we would do is, frankly, name your game. I'll be here with drawing tablet and a big piece of paper. And if you want to talk about feathers, if you want to do some grid work, if you want to do that sort of thing, we'll be doing some drawing and a little bit of tutorial on different techniques. Whatever you happen to call out, I'll try to get to everything, and we'll do that for about an hour. So I'm thinking tomorrow we'll probably do, we'll announce it. We'll go to the Quilters Apothecary page, the boss says, on Facebook, and we will announce the times. I'm thinking somewhere around 10:30 and 2:30, but he may change that. So definitely check on the Quilters Apothecary Facebook page, because not everybody is on my page, and it's best to be on the Quilters Apothecary page so you don't get all my personal stuff. So know you're loved, take care of each other, and God bless.